Hey, this is Deb Morrison. Today I think I'm going to talk a little bit about forest management. I know this is a really hot topic across the Gulf Islands and particularly here on North Pender. So I thought I would come down here in the national park, but where Roe Lake is, and down on Shingle Bay here. And I thought it would be really helpful just to see what we're talking about. So a little bit about my background that's relevant for this, and I know that different people bring different skills to it, and I think there's some amazing people in the Gulf Islands that we draw on for resources and knowledge. My background is that I worked in and out of the forest sector for about 10 years before I was 30. I worked in a number of different areas, the Mid-Coast Forest District of Bella Coola, and I worked with Silver Ring Forestry and others doing all sorts of silvicultural work. So I have actually quite a bit of experience in the forest sector. And then I also did research for my master's. I have a master's in plant sciences and environmental sciences, and my research project was in the long-term ecological research site in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I studied biogeochemistry of forest ecosystems. So I actually do understand forest management quite a bit. So here in this park, they've been doing a pilot. And what you see behind me and up over in this direction is more natural stand. You see mixed age trees. You see they're spread out across the landscape. The understory hasn't grown up yet, and it is winter, so we don't see it as much. But what you see is a relatively natural stand. Most of the Gulf Islands have been logged at least once, sometimes in some places 3 times. And so this is an unusual thing to be able to see, where you see more open understory and different age trees, different species of trees. This is a healthy forest. It's working toward a healthy forest. And we want our forests to look like this in the Gulf Islands because they're more fire resistant if they look like this. They're healthier root systems that support the steep terrain. It reduces landslide issues. It supports water conservation. This is a forest we want to see. What we do have in a lot of places, however, are forests that are highly dense. Smaller trees, and when you look up across in this direction, you can see that there are densely packed trees. We have forests that there is some multi-species in here, but some of the other species are maybe struggling. They're not as big because they're crowded out by all of the similar aged Douglas fir, primarily what I'm looking at here, some hemlock too. And so the problem with forests like this is that there's lots of debris and small branches and things low to the ground. So if a fire comes in here, it'll go right up into the canopy and it'll burn really hot. So this is not a fire resistant forest. And we want to make most of our forests here in Pender a lot more fire resistant. So when we talk about forest management here, we want to think about how do we preserve the maximum amount of forest in the healthiest state possible. Now, I've heard a lot of rhetoric about tree cutting, this and that, and there's a lot of emotions in the community when private property is cut. Large sections of it are cut. We've seen that at least 3 or 4 times here in the Gulf Islands, where more than 4 acres at a time was cut out of a private property area. There is definitely a contingent here on the islands that think private property rights rule. And I'm here to say I disagree with that completely, because we live in the Islands Trust area, and the Islands Trust Act mandates that we preserve and protect the islands. It is not healthy to remove large sections of forest in these islands. It causes problems with water retention, it causes biodiversity problems, it fragments our forests in ways that we get increased windfall. So I don't agree that we should be cutting large sections of forest. So what do? Private property rights are one thing. Forest management for fire safety is another thing. It's all wrapped up in water, as most things are in the Gulf Islands. And whose authority is it also comes into play. Technically speaking, the Islands Trust doesn't have authority over quote unquote tree cutting. And then I asked, well, who does? And it's actually quite a complicated question in the Islands Trust area. So what it seems to be the answer is that the province of British Columbia has the authority over both private managed forest lands and also private lands that are cut. So they are managing the PFML, private forest management lands, but they're not doing that with the private lands. So people are allowed to cut whatever they want, and there's no real regulation or rules on it other than that if you are selling the logs, you have to get a stamp on them. So who's looking out for the island's trust with relationship to forests? And the question is difficult because of this residual powers. So the last Trust Council voted to ask the province for the authority to manage trees to be returned or to be delegated into the island's trust. Now, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a bunch of new rules necessarily. It means that we would have local control of what we want to do on our landscape. So we as a community could sit down and have a conversation with the fire department, with foresters who know more than many of us do in this area, with ecologists, with water specialists, and we could sit down together in our community and really understand what we want to see to protect all of these competing rights that are tied up in these beautiful forests we have here. What is pretty clear when I talk to people one-on-one is that they don't want to see all the trees disappear off the island. But we have so much private land on Pender that it's quite possible what individual people have rights to in terms of tree cutting on the lots that have been cut, every individual landholder has those same rights. And they could exercise them. There's nothing to say that they can't. So when you look at the vast stretches of forest on Pender, understand that only the land right now that is in parks is actually protected from being cut. And so if we want to do something as a community, we need to think clearly about if we want that power to be brought into the islands, or if we want to demand that the Ministry of Forests actually engage more deeply with us in a conversation about how to manage our forests. So I think that's all I'll say for now, and I would love to hear from people on what they think about this. One of the things to know is that it's not a simple issue of you can cut a tree or you can't cut a tree. It's about forest management and how we create a healthy community ecologically that we can live in with it. And I guess the other thing is, there are some tools that the Islands Trust has around development permit areas that we have managed some forest related issues. So like riparian areas along the ocean or along lakes or rivers, streams, where you're not supposed to be cutting trees, raptors' nests, anything around a nest. But those are not always being abided. In the last term, I had 4 or 5 times where I retroactively had to deal with a DPA where somebody had cut trees. And frankly, when you look at a tree like this tree is putting on more carbon every day than 5 or 6 little seedlings that would replace it. And so we want to keep some of the bigger trees as much as we can, because the Gulf Islands are also like the lungs of our planet, like rainforests are. They are part of the system that pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and helps, counter our climate change problem. Every one of these trees like this is doing a lot of work for us every summer, every growing season. So we want to keep big trees like this from a climate change perspective as well. All right, that's all I'm going to say for now. Love to hear your thoughts. Do email me. Thank you.